Hey folks, David Stewart here. I'm here with Jesse White. He is the creator of a brand new pulp magazine, comic magazine called Strange Adventures. Great branding for that because it just makes me think of, like Weird Tales
Yeah,
and all that stuff.
yeah,
And even makes me think of some of like the Marvel horror comics from like the 60s and 70s.
yeah.
This kind of went out the door. I was writing a horror story the other night where I had the kids like reading the horror comics like about the zombies and stuff. And I remember this one in particular that just was like, I don't know, it was from the perspective of the zombie. So I put him in there. It's like, he was like standing in the swamp for like days on end with no thoughts until he decided he had to go eat brains.
It was
I need to
actually
find that one.
interesting. Yeah,
Yeah.
it was interesting to brand it because a lot of those names have already been taken, and I had to really work through several of them, looking through all the archives. I mean, there's bizarre adventures, strange tales. I had to work through it really carefully to get one that's never been used. As far as I'm concerned, I've never seen one that's my title, but
Yeah, and as long as there's not, as far as trademarking goes, as long as there's not like an active brand that's trying to use that can't be separated from, you're probably fine.
oh,
Trademarks
okay.
not that big a deal. But see, I was going to call this stream the indie stream, and then I'm like, I'll just Google it. Yeah, there's a streaming website called Indie Stream that streams like indie movies and stuff like that. So I'm like,
Oh,
okay, well, I don't want to. That's a little too big of a trademark. So I came up with
yeah.
NewPub Talk because this new stream is going to focus primarily on new publishing, and of course, having guests on who are into new publishing. Why don't we talk a little bit about Strange Adventures and this cool magazine?
Sure. Well, it's going to be 64 pages long. It's going to be printed on newsprint, a la Alterna Comics, and the vintage style that they used to do. It's got 9 different stories. Collaborative authors include yourself, David Stewart.
Yep, I'm going to be in this one, so I'm acting slightly selfishly, having Jesse on. I promise I'll have other people that I don't directly benefit on,
And a number of other guys that are wide ranging. Some are from Canada, where I live. Many are from the US. And it's going to be full of different styles of pulp stories that you remember from the old days, like jungle adventure, weird noir. We got straightforward fantasy or dark fantasy. Lots of really exciting things to come through. And yeah, I'm really stoked for it. At this point, I've got many of the pages completed, but not the entire comic. So there's quite a bit left to draw.
Okay, great. So I know that you've done quite a bit of this, and I thought you were almost done or very close to done, which is good because that means to me that we're not going to be waiting super long time after the close of the campaign to actually get everything out and fulfilled. I think that's something that a lot of NewPub guys should take to heart, is actually getting things done on an appropriate timeline and making sure that people get things regularly or get things, when you promise that you're going to deliver them. Because otherwise you're not really engaging in that alternative to traditional publishing. Traditional publishing is good at a whole lot of things, but they tend to take a very long time to do things.
Is that so?
Yeah. So, I've had friends who got, books traditionally published and they'd be like, hey, look for my book next summer. I'm like, 12 months to put a book out? My gosh, I can't believe that. Now in the comics world, they're very good at getting things out on time, but they kind of drive their talent like, you got to get it done on time. Like I've heard like horror stories from the Marvel and DC rooms from like back in the 70s and 80s, where it's like, I was looking and I had like 9 panels left to draw and I had 5 hours to draw them in. So I was drawing panels 30 minutes at a time to get through the project.
Yeah.
Or, I knew that one panel I had to actually draw well. So, I just drew faces for like 4 panels in a row for the dialogue, things like that. Cause you had to get it done. You had to get the project out.
Absolutely. So, Jim Shooter is responsible for, partly responsible in the circles of comic art for the death of Gene Day. He drove Gene Day so hard that the guy died, but he was really living on coffee and cigarettes. So it wasn't Shooter's fault, but Shooter pushed him really hard.
Yeah, Shooter really drove a hard trade now, and that's the thing is like those late 70s and 80s of Marvel Comics. They had a huge number of
They
titles.
did.
They were all really popular. I've made some content on this in the past. That um, comics content was really popular back in the 80s. I remember seeing it at every drugstore.
Uh-huh.
I remember buying Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comics or Spider-Man comics. I remember buying like Web of Spider-Man, which you know, was almost like, because it was black and white most of the time, if I remember right.
Web of Spider-Man. Yeah.
I think Web of Spider-Man was the black and white one. There was three of them. There was Amazing Spider-Man, Spectacular Spider-Man, and then I think Web of Spider-Man.
And there was Spidey. That was in the early 80s. That was for young readers. That was for young readers.
So yeah, you get these, and they would come on this newsprint paper, just really stapled together very, very quickly. I remember, like, I was thinking of Web of Spider-Man because today people might call that like an ash can. They'd be like, "Oh, it's an ash can comic," which is basically a cheap black and white, print it, fold it, staple it. There's the comic, right? It's coming out. So this is something that is also coming out in NewPub, is having ash cans as their own thing. Now, I always liked black and white comics, and this comics is it going to be entirely black and white?
Well, your panels in SockNet are going to have those blue screens to show the interface. There they are. They're going to be blue. And the reason I'm choosing to do that is because it actually is no different cost for me to print it black and white than it is color for a newsprint. It's a really good feature of newsprint. And Peter Simetti also has this aspect when he does his what's he call it? The companion printing program at Alterna. It doesn't cost any different to print it in color. So I'm doing it in black and white as a choice. And the end stories, the picto fiction sections, there's going to be some color in those as well. So since it's going to have color, I thought that I'd do your screens blue because I thought that would make them stand out.
Yeah, they do stand out. And of course, if you're reading a primarily just ink comic, and then you get to see like a splash of color that has its own effect.
It's also a super old retro style that they used to use these monotones. I don't know. They call them monochrome. And sometimes old Dungeons and Dragons modules, they'd be like black and white, but they'd have orange, or they'd have black and white, they'd just blue.
Let me see if I'm just going to show myself here. If you guys can see the map behind me. Yeah. So the map behind me was drawn basically with that, what they called monochrome. So back in the day, in order to print something in color, you had to make usually 4 plates: a plate for black, a plate for red, blue, and yellow. The primary pigment colors. And this is so. If you get any of the old comics, and I don't have any of my old ones sitting here, or like the Epic collections, if you get like the reprints of the old comics, they look better on the newsprint because of this process. Because they used, there was just really only 4 primary colors, and they didn't do all that much blending other than in some case, of course you got like your purples and things like that. But you'll notice if you look at the older comics, rather than a newer one might have 3 shades of blue. I mean, even like into the 90s, they started using like 2 shades of blue. You had a light blue and then a dark blue. Back in the day, it was just blue. So it was either blue, black, or white, and you did all of your shading with one color in essence. But this app was like that. So if you look at old prints of Lord of the Rings, like the old hardbacks, they'd have red plates. So they'd have red letters stamped on the maps because they could really only afford to make 1 extra plate. And so you just chose a contrasting color, and it was red.
Yeah.
Like red looked good. So that's what I did. I put like red letters on the black map to get that look. Of course, I do it. It's done digitally in a digital color space, but it has that same look. And so when you get it out and look at it, of course, because I hand draw the lines, and it ends up looking correct.
It's the same as what I'm working on, using digital process only to assemble it, and it's all done by hand. And there's an old technique that they used to use called zip tones. Sometimes people call it zip-a-tones. There's a zip on that picture there. If you go back, or that one as well, you see on the camera where it says War TV right there.
Yes,
that's a zip tone. So basically, what they used to use was a clear piece of vellum that had a print on it that would make a halftone between black and white. Because really the old magazines there's no gray at all. It would be
Yeah, it was just a
basically
black plate. That's all you
black.
had.
Yeah. So I produced that zip tone, and you can still buy the zip tone sheets, but I don't have any. It's not
Yeah, it's
cost
this.
effective.
Let me see if I can zoom in a little bit here.
Yeah. So you can see that sort of half tone that I've created there on the camera, that's just a bunch of lines together. And that goes right back to the old days of etching, when you see these incredible plates done, like say the Milton's Paradise Lost or the Rime of the Ancient Mariner done. And those Gustave Doré plates, they had these halftones made by series of lines really close together and or dots. And that zip tone I created not with a piece of plastic, but actually with a pattern on the computer, and I put it in. So it's using new technology to make an old effect.
Yeah, and you can do this in Photoshop. It has these as textures. I've used them before. Now, this was also a funny thing to me. It was like I don't know if you watched it, the Into the Spider-Verse.
No,
movie.
I've not seen it. No,
I don't think it's a good movie, and I don't really like it as a fan of Spider-Man either. But one of the things they did is they had those zip tone things like put in to try to replicate the aesthetics of old comics.
Mm-hmm.
The funny thing is that once you start getting into more of the modern comics, you don't see those a lot because you're not working with those halftones in the digital process at all. So it's kind of weird to see them where I'm like, it's reminiscent of maybe like the old black and white, like Savage Sword of Conan kind of comics. Where you had to, you couldn't do gray. So in order to do gray, it's the same thing with hatching, right? Like when you do hatching, if you blur your eyes, you're going to perceive it as gray, but it's not. It's a series of lines that kind of come out of it. You've also done some brushwork in this too, right? Because this is a true gray here.
Yeah, this is the thing that I wanted.
Here.
Yeah, I tried to make each comic story, because there's 9, have a kind of a different quality of drawing. So that one that you were showing before, the jungle, that's just straight brushwork, black ink on white. There's no halftones at all. That's my idol, John Buscema's style, and that's the way I try to draw all the time. But I thought because I'm the only artist, it might become redundant to see the same style. So I let myself sort of hang out in different ways. And the one that's below that, you see that there is the zips being used. And if you go, you can see there's zips throughout the whole thing. And then there's some washes in some of them too. There's the, I think it's further below, the one that's called The Final Test, even down more than that.
Northern Boy.
There it is.
There it is, yeah.
That's got ink wash there on the back wall. You see that wall there behind the drapery? Yes. That's a wash. So basically that's just mixing India ink with water and making it thin and using sort of a rubber-based resistant that blocks it so it doesn't get onto the floor. And these are all done in comic style. But then if you go down to Matt Wellman's, which is the very, very bottom one, or the second to bottom, that's a real noodly illustration style. Like that's not comic style art. That's really drawn in there with, I guess, my full-throated illustrative style.
Yeah. Yeah, I like the word noodling too. So I've kind of adopted that into my vocabulary sometimes.
Yeah,
because
you've given me many words for my vocabulary too.
Because like now it's like it's because it makes sense. You're filling in much more of the space. If you compare a panel like this, and by the way, I love the lighting on this central figure, like from this flashlight.
Yeah.
I don't know if you were going to draw in more details there.
No, that's it.
That's it, right? But yeah, the lighting there. This is a weird thing about drawing. So, we're taught to draw lines, and lines don't exist in reality. You're approximating what the actual image is. So when you do something with a light source, it's not drawing it. It's not drawing there. You have to not draw where the light is.
That's absolutely.
And it's a funny thing to think about that you're just looking at the page, but you perceive it as light.
Yeah, on that the SockNet page, if you zoom up to that one, the picture of Abram in panel 2, I believe it is, there, just below the girl, where the big shot of the girl there, you see Abram there in the background. That face is literally the size of my thumbnail. And when I was painting it, I came to this conclusion, like a really big, profound thought. Like when you're drawing that small, it's the real test of what you, if you know really how to work or you don't, because in that small, you can only put the necessary information. And I put the place where the light isn't. I just put the shadows. So if you look at it, you can see there's no lines. It's just little globs of shadow to make his face. But our distance from it, it gives it kind of a natural look. It's like if you see a person in distance, your eye can't see all that detail, and that's a big mistake that artists make that are noodlers. They want to hyper detail everything, and what ends up happening is it looks like a Photoshop picture. Like it's like the old quote from Jurassic Park. You were so excited that you didn't think if you should. And the idea is that they put too much detail in it. That's not how you see. You don't see like that. You see focus in a place that you're looking and kind of nothing in the other places. So,
yeah. And the other thing too, that I like about this is whenever you have a foreground and a background, you want the focus to really be on the foreground, and your eye gets drawn to the background according to the broader details that are in it. Now it's kind of, I say that, but if you go and you spend some time in an art museum that has a lot of Baroque, Rococo period art, and you look at it and it's like, this is the opposite. This is like somebody's like, okay, there's a dude looking up at the general here. And so the artist would get in there with a brush with a single horsehair, just like perfectly do that face. And you can get up close to the magnifying glass and see the most insane detail on these 17th century paintings. It's amazing.
Yeah.
But there's a reason a lot of people look at the Mona Lisa and they're like, well, that's the most profound one. I'm like, the background is basically just blobs of color.
Yeah, it is. The thing about those Baroque paintings,
so mysterious. It's like,
yeah, that's right. But those Baroque paintings, there's a key factor that I think is not maybe in the consciousness of our listeners, is that those paintings are enormous. I mean, you've seen them, obviously.
Yes.
I've seen them too.
They're a whole wall. It's like you look at them on your computer and you're like, wow, that how can you tell what's going on? It's like, well, when you see it in full glory.
Yeah, yeah. Like you get all those Flemish masters, or you get these great Rococo painters. Those guys were painting enormous mural-sized ones, and Mona Lisa is like this big. Like,
yeah, it's small.
Yeah.
And so this is another thing I'm thinking about Baroque art. So people who, if you're not looking at you got to look at the real paintings sometimes. If you ever have like an opportunity, if you're ever in Southern California, go to the Getty. Their Baroque section, they have like Baroque furniture and stuff too. You wouldn't believe the amount of detail and the skill that went into creating these. It really was like everything you could possibly do to make it the most profoundly impressive piece of art you've ever seen. Like, it's the most impressive art, both in terms of music and in terms of visual art, came out of the Baroque period.
It did.
It's crazy. But at the same time, you also had, say, like Dutch genre painting. And if you've ever seen any Dutch genre paintings, they're little. And what's the point of those? You're like, you have these massive paintings of like a king walking triumphantly through the streets with like the subjects like leaning up to him and thanking him for conquering the town or whatever. And then at the same time, you get these genre paintings, which are just a couple of peasants playing lute in a pub. And when you understand the size difference, it makes total sense. Is that the genre paintings were really to just like hang in a parlor, that someone would hang up in a parlor to have a fun picture of, a lady playing a lute or something. It was really like a completely divergent set of styles.
Well, that's the thing. The point is that they're serving different purposes, and this is kind of why I think a lot of comic art goes astray, because they're not serving the purpose of a comic. They're trying to do a Baroque painting. I mean, the Baroque painting and its noodly glory is wonderful, but it's not a comic. That's the key.
Yeah, I think paintings don't work super well for comics on two levels. First one is they usually don't look right in a little book.
Yeah,
and they just don't. And now if you're doing a full panel action shot that could be like a pinup, that's fine. You can always have some of those in a book. I think a lot of books now tend to have, they're like every page is trying to do that in some cases.
Yeah.
Or you have that, but it's shrunk down to like a quarter size panel. It's really rare to see like 9 panel pages now, I feel like.
Yeah.
And so that's fine for that. But what happens is that you lose those details when you get it shrunk, and it just kind of looks like a mess where you can't see, you can't really see what you're trying to look at. at the same time, it also slows you down because the point of the comic is to tell a story. And so if you're putting a huge amount of superfluous detail in every single panel, then the reader stopping to look at the pictures may be too much.
Yeah.
And it may also take you longer to finish.
Well, this particular picture you've got here, it's a good example because this is kind of an example of me kind of pulling in and out. Now, this is the first 2 panels of the story, and it's very Baroque in its approach. Like you can see all those puny little trees down in the valley. And this point that you're saying about it slows you down. I kind of wanted that to happen. It's kind of a vista, but if you go into the next page, it's not like this at all. No, I mean, it's not present in this in this presentation. The next page of this story, it zooms into more paneled comic art. I did this kind of really letting it have some room to breathe, because it's like the text is talking about the boy being able to smell the sea over the distant hills, and he's looking out over the mountain, and it gives you that sense of kind of wide open space. And then you see this boy's face. It's kind of a heartbroken, sort of morose look. This is what this story is about, and I wanted to give that setting at the beginning, and that's why I did it with that kind of magnanimous detail there.
It kind of, I'm kind of reminded of some of these fantasy movies, some of my favorite fantasy movies, including like Conan the Barbarian, which I think is one of your favorites too.
Yeah, absolutely.
You have at the beginning his father talking to him, and then about the scenery. I feel movies are just not willing to do that anymore, to have you take time to look at things.
I know.
And it's funny if you go back and watch something like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. There's a huge amount of shots that are just like, here's some empty desert for 30 seconds.
I know.
I mean, someone slowly walking across it.
That Conan movie you're talking about, the Milius one from 82, after that speech that the father gives to the son, there's no speaking until the time after Conan becomes enslaved in the Wheel of Pain. Yeah. There's no speaking at all. It's just music. And I just like that.
It's a great score too. And it's got that da, 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 and he's like the boy walking around the water wheel until he's like an adult.
The audience cheered when Arnold looked up when I saw that.
This is a fun story. I'm trying to remember the name of the actor who was playing Conan's father. His name escapes me. He actually wrote that speech.
Yes.
So he's a poet, and the director asked him, like, can you come up with something that works for Conan? And that's what he came up with.
Yeah. He's in Red Dawn as well.
The sword, and it was perfect. He didn't get a writing credit for it, unfortunately.
No.
But because it wasn't enough of the screenplay, but he wrote that part.
He did.
Movie, and it's like one of the most memorable parts. And there's another part that I think was written by one of the actors too, the part that's like time enough for the earth in the grave. I think that was actually written by one of the actors as well.
Mako.
Great men once lived here.
Great. Mako.
But long ago.
Giants. It's wonderful, actually. John Milius.
Gods. Once, but long ago.
That's a great moment, actually, when he finally meets him. But we should do a stream about Conan one day, but I could talk forever.
Rusty says he likes the movie, but it parted away from the Conan books. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But to me, it captured the spirit
He's right.
Sorcery in such a way. And it's rare that I would forgive someone for departing from the source material, but Conan at this point, if you look at Robert E. Howard as the source, that's merely like the first chronographer of a mythology, shared mythology.
He's absolutely right, Rusty. It's got nothing to do with Robert E. Howard, or very, very tangentially, but it's Conan, man. I don't know. That's the old sentimental me in there, but boy,
it's who Conan is.
Yeah.
There's the images.
Oh, it's great. Man. And Arnold, man, John Milius said, if Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't exist, we would have had to have built such a person.
Yeah, it was. And I think that is going to be, I mean, it's what made him a star, I think, because
it did.
It was just an exposition of it's not just his body, though. So you focus on his body, and Lou Ferrigno had a great body, too.
Oh, I know.
Lou Ferrigno didn't have the presence Arnold had. There's a charisma that kind of oozes out of the guy whenever you put a camera on him.
And his acting, he's good acting. Like it's not like it maybe not like I don't know Laurence Olivier, but there's a scene that they edited out of it, which is on the special edition, where they didn't put it in on account of the fact that Dino De Laurentiis, who didn't like Arnold very much, said, "I can't stand that accent," and it's a monologue. Have you seen that, David?
I don't think I have.
It's a wonderful monologue, and it's just before the big battle on the mounds when Thulsa Doom's men come, and Conan's sitting there, and he says, "That wind, it reminds me of when I was a boy picking blueberries in the hills 30 years." And then this moment transitions, and he goes, 30 years of pitiless warfare, not being able to sleep like normal men. And it was like, it was so good. Yeah. It's wonderful. It's a wonderful speech.
Yeah, and then before he says, "Crom, I never prayed to you before."
That's the speech.
And he goes, "But I tell you, grant me one thing, grant me revenge.
Revenge.
Then to hell with you."
Yeah. He's got some killer lines like, the crush your enemies driven before you in the lamentation of the women.
Yeah, it's great. So yeah, I mean, it makes me think of that. Another movie, which I don't know if you've seen it. I would recommend it for you. Other people are going to hear me say this and they'll be like, "Oh, I didn't like it." It's called Valhalla Rising.
Oh, I love it.
I love Valhalla Rising. Oh man. It's one of, and as time stretches from the first time I've seen it, I like it more because it's such a contrast. Like, I can't believe the movie got made. Again, it's one of those movies where there's no dialogue.
Yeah.
Like the first half of the movie, it's just, there's barely any speaking.
Yeah.
And the main character never speaks.
Never speaks. He's mute. Yeah. That boy that's on the picture of my Kickstarter there, that boy has a little bit of the young Conan in him. And he's actually sort of me too. I don't know if on Twitter you've ever seen pictures of me in the 80s, but that's exactly what my haircut looked like back in those days. So when that movie came out, that little boy that played Conan as a young character was the same age as me. And I got to see it in the theater. And I don't know if that's child abuse or not, but I did. And and this is sort of a story about my childhood, this one. And I wasn't living in 84 AD in Ireland, but it's a sort of a takeoff on my life,
Yeah, I think it's great. So let's talk about some of the stories that are in our Strange Adventures magazines. We've talked about some of them. We've been talking about we've gone far afield. I wanted to say noodling. So I use this a lot because, there's certain kinds of art where you noodle. Like I did this video on Berserk, which I actually still have this one sitting here. And so Gitaro Mira tends to do quite a bit of noodling, but as I look a little closer, again, he uses, you probably can't see, you guys probably can't see all that well.
It's going tilted a bit. Yeah.
If you can see the castle part, it's on this side.
Yeah, there it is. Tilt it. There you go.
There's actually not a lot of noodling. For a wall of stone, there's virtually no noodling, and he does all the shading with those zip tones.
Oh, he does,
There's zip tones all through it. Now that I know how to look for them, he does a lot of hatching, right? But a lot of the hatching is just kind of noodly hatching to just add darkness to some stone there.
Yeah.
It's so hard to see without me having like a different camera setup.
Yeah.
If I turn this light off, because it's bright enough. It's made to light my face, not to light white.
That's
pages.
better. That's better.
You can see Guts has his hair and stuff. It's just
zip.
a zip. It's just a zip. He uses that all over the place. So he does a lot of noodling, but at the same time, there's these fields of white. The character faces are fields of white with the details drawn in.
You got to have big guts to be able to pull that off. Like every artist is going to feel this pull. They want to noodle, but you have to leave it blank. Like my idol John says, a drawing that's open has the power because the features are in the right place. Any deviation from the right place, it looks like a distortion in the uncanny valley. You have to know exactly where the face features go. And that's why you have to have courage to make it open.
Yeah, and it's kind of like the more lines you put on the face, the older it looks.
Yeah.
As well.
It becomes distorted and looks old and aged. Yeah.
And that's exactly what happens. I'm trying to find another one where it's just a big panel with just like very little detail on the face, but the details are just in the right place. And the thing is, this is the first set of books he put out.
Mm-hmm.
Here's a really big face, but there's barely any detail, just a hint of action below the lips. Everything else is just precise detail. His technical expertise as far as drawing this character or everything in general gets better by the end of the first 3 volumes and gets like to master level by the end of the 10th. By the end of the 10th, he's like top of his game. He's so good at what he's doing. It's almost like you go back and look at the 3 and you're like, man, this is like amateur work. And you look a little closer, you're like, no, this is really high quality work. It's just he got way better. He's got even better by the time he was getting into his 10th volume.
This is the SockNet page. Where is it there? And you can see that open face is exactly what I'm talking about. Really gutsy to do that. And you can see that's how big Abram's face is. That's my finger there.
Yeah, that's tiny. That's really hard to draw small faces. I think this is another thing too. If you almost never find this in art museums because people don't think of preserving it. But before the age of photography, you had to have portraits, and so there's a technique for portrait drawing or portrait painting where you'd paint portraits that were locket size.
Yeah.
So you'd have a locket size portrait painted of your daughter for some little thing that you may have in your home. And so the painter would paint it this big and it would be accurate at that big. So I talk about those, like the brushes are like the single horsehair to just like draw the eyebrow so precisely. And if you didn't put that eyebrow in the right place, it was never going in the right place.
It's over. Yeah.
You're repainting it.
Yeah. And they didn't have zoom capacity. It's just, that's pure organic, analog skill.
Yeah. And so I actually drew my newest map digitally. People are like, why don't you just get it out and draw it on paper? It's like, because I can't handle the mistakes. So the first one, I did it so carefully and there's still mistakes. I'm like, I got to have the capacity to get rid of those mistakes. So I did it digitally, but I didn't zoom too far in. I never want to do that because then as you zoom out, like you said, you lose the detail of what's there. The mountains are too detailed and they just become like a gray nothing. A lot of fantasy maps now look like garbage to me. We've gotten away from basics.
Your maps are fabulous.
The maps in my goal is to have the maps that are like in Tolkien, and Michael Moorcock's books.
They totally look like Tolkien maps. It's wonderful.
Yeah, Tolkien really did Tolkien was a visual artist himself, and he did illustrations for the original version of The Hobbit that are actually pretty darn good, especially for what they are. They're fantasy illustrations. Yeah, and they were meant to be in plates. So when you actually see them as the lithographic plates, they look great. I mean,
I've got a copy with those in it.
Yeah. So he knew what he was doing. And I think he's kind of like me in that, I'm kind of a guy who's like, I kind of feel the need to do everything myself.
Yeah, I know.
I got to do it all.
Yeah. Zool.
Yeah. So,
one-man band.
Yeah. Well, there's guests on it. There's guests on Zool, but it's mostly like my friend Chad staying over. Let's do some music. My son plays drums on it here and there. Does some like drum fills because he thought that would be fun. He actually plays keyboard on it too. I just had him like play in some like ambient keyboard parts that he thought were fun.
So that song on my Kickstarter page is written by David. That's Transverse, and that's a story that's about some cranial surgery, I think, that needs to be told.
Yeah. So yeah, I had this implant put in my head. I don't know if I could show it to y'all.
I'm not looking.
Most people know I have it. So I have a metal implant like sticking out of my head. I have no idea if you can see it or not because I can't look out the side of my head. But yeah, I have an implant. I had that drilled into my head right before Thanksgiving a couple of years ago. And my friend Chad came down for Thanksgiving to stay with us. And because he's originally from Georgia. And so he was here in California at the time. It's like, hey, let's do some music. So we just had an idea. It's like, let's do a song that's got no guitar. It's just bass guitar. So he came up with some riffs and I came up with some riffs and we kind of put together a weird little piece out of them. And I put in some drums and some keyboards and that was it. That was the song. It's got like 4 or 5 bass guitar tracks layered on top of each other.
That's awesome.
And in order to produce that, I had to do a lot of creative things with the drums because you're filling up all the sonic space at the bottom end of the spectrum. You only have so much room to work with there as far as volume and things go. So the bass drum is actually a higher pitch than the bass guitar, but you still perceive it as bass drum because everything else is kind of
that's interesting.
Occupying those higher layers.
Do you remember what tuning you had on it? When it goes down to the root of the tonic, there's this note that at one point it resolves down to the tonic, and it's like my guts want to fall out.
I think, I think it's in like low B.
Okay.
It's in low B. So
A big fat low B there. Bah, you know?
I think I recorded it. I think most of the bass parts are on a 5-string bass, so just we have that. Might have been a C. No, I think it was either a B or could have been B flat actually.
That's fat, man.
I don't remember too much, but yeah, it's pretty low, and it works good.
Well, thanks for letting me use that song. It was great, perfect with the skeleton and stuff that I did.
Yeah, they should have made King Conan with Arnold too.
Oh yeah,
it's too late now.
Too late.
It's too late.
But you know, in some ways, I'm glad it didn't happen because it would never match the first one. The second one is like a pathetic cartoon compared to the first one, and it would never be as good as that. So I like it sort of never gonna ever.
Yeah. Yeah, I understand that, and I feel that same way. I think we've talked about this. You know, our generation has this nostalgia for brands and like franchises, and it's like I don't want that. I don't want a Conan brand or a Conan franchise. People get excited about new Conan books, and I'm like, I'm just, you know, I'm only excited because I remember Conan being good, not because I think this is actually going to be good. You know. Now the newer Marvel Conan books they're not really that bad or anything either, but they're not the John Buscema books from like the 70s, you know, the Savage Sword of Conan stuff. It's not on the same level, and that's okay. It doesn't have to be. The cool thing about old stuff is you could still read it and still watch it.
Yeah.
It's never really an issue. All right, let's talk about the first story here a little bit.
Sure.
The Greta story, the Trials of Greta.
Yeah, so the title, "The Trials of Greta," is an homage to this bondage comic book that existed in the turn of the century called "The Perils of Gwendolyn," and it was a BDSM comic book where this girl, a good girl, it's a kind of a trope in comics, the good girl story. It's a good girl blonde that gets herself into a lot of trouble, and she gets tied up a lot and beaten up, and it's basically some twisted sort of story about bondage, but I wanted to reference it because it's a good girl story, you know, the big boobs and the blonde hair and everything. And so when I wrote this character, I wanted her to look like a mix between Barbara Crampton and Anna Nicole Smith, you know. And Barbara Crampton has that like crop cut hair, you know, you might have known her from the Reanimator movie, you know, you remember that character, and Anna Nicole Smith. So this story is a jungle story. You know, the jungle adventure is always about a girl in the jungle, and she's a Belgian. She's in a Zeppelin, and the Zeppelin goes down at the beginning, and she finds herself stuck in the bowels of the Congo. And what ends up happening is that the first picture I ever drew when I was conceiving of it was with an ape, you know, and Robert E. Howard always has these giant apes. So this is my Robert E. Howard sort of story, because there's going to be a giant ape eventually, and he's got this crown on, and he's calls himself King Ape because he can speak like a man. And so Greta and him are going to have a little face off in it. And this part, she's facing off against a snake, another big trope that you see in pulp stories.
Yeah. So I like this too. Also snakes. You know, why did it have to be snakes? Hold on, let me turn that off.
Yeah.
So the snakes are always good too. Now this is a stretch goal that we need to add is a pinup of Greta.
Oh yeah.
In a swimsuit. I
don't know how to make stretch goals, but I think it probably should be pretty easy. I'll figure it out.
Yeah, if you make a stretch goal, that's like if you know our goal for this is $9,120. That's a big goal.
It is. Yeah.
We'll get there. But so we're going to try to get there. If maybe the stretch goal for $12,000 is a free pinup.
Yeah, that would be great. Yeah.
Free full color pinup, which I think would be pretty fun. Of Greta. Now, what about is this Greta 2 here?
That's Red Sonja. No, that's just a little example of me doing a hand inking so that it proves that I'm not doing it on the computer, you know. That's me hand inking it.
Yeah. Now there's something about hand inking too, which is just that you can only do it once.
Yep.
Man, it's a different I need to do more of it because it's always it makes you focus in a different way. If you know you can hit that undo button, you're just never as careful.
Yeah. Can you play that video? Is that possible to be done or no? It's just a minute long or something. It's sped up.
You mean you don't ink this lightning fast inking technique?
No, I don't. I think the real take was about 2 minutes long, and this is, I think, what does it end up being, 30 seconds or something? I don't remember.
Yeah. I
Anyways,
actually really like watching videos like this where it's either sped up or it's just somebody showing how they do it. There's a painter that I really like, which most people probably know him from like Magic the Gathering card art, but he's a
yeah.
great classical painter. His name's Howard Lyon. I think
Excuse me just a minute.
And if you guys ever check him out, he does these videos like this too, where he will have the basically he'll have everything sped up so you can see how he does it. And he'll do every painting usually 3 times. He'll do like a sketch, and then he'll basically do a color study to kind of see what colors he wants to use, and then he does like a final version. You can see how he layers on the backgrounds and then the details and which comes where and at what time and in what order, which I think is always like a great thing to be able to see. So yeah, hand inked, which is always pretty fun. You guys can get this. Let me go ahead and make sure I have it linked in chat. So you can get this. I think this Kickstarter is running until the end of November, so we'll have this month to really get it going. So $11 will get you the comic. We'll get you the comic, and then there's some more options there. Personal videos. You could get original art panels if you want original art. I personally I like original art when I can get it because you can see. If you don't go to museums that often to see art, it's very different to see the medium itself.
Yeah.
It's something we lose track of. Like when you see a painting or even something that's drawn with ink, not seeing it on the paper itself, you lose a little bit of what's there.
On that pledge level that you can get an original piece, I just randomly put 20 as a total, and I've gotten 7, I think, people buy it already. There's more than 20, but I can't edit that now. So I think I might add another one of another 20 because there's actually 64 pages of comics. I just didn't think people would want it that much. So a lot of people have pledged on that. No one's pledged on the rough art. I offered that as a level where you can just get for a lower price, just the pencil art. But the ink, yeah.
So do you how do you actually, what's your process? Do you trace and then do you ink on the tracing, or do you trace and then ink?
I do a few things. You can see behind me here is my table, and it's like an illustrator's animation table that rolls on a wheel like that.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, it's very cool. So that when you're drawing and you want it to turn a different angle, you don't have to do something like this. You can just rotate it around. So I do a variety of things. Like this particular one, you can see there's pencil here. I think you can see that. Yeah, there. Pencil here, which I just ink over and then erase. But sometimes I use the light table and trace my pencils if, for instance, I'm a little bit unsure about the inking, because if you blow it, it's blown, right? You can sometimes get something off with one of these Sakura electric erasers. You can actually sort of like sand the page down a bit, like take a bit of the ink off.
So this was actually a trick my mom taught me years ago.
Yeah.
For erasing, if you use really thick paper, and if you need to erase, you can actually erase with an X-Acto knife or razor blade.
Yeah.
You literally just shave off the top layer of the page, and you can just fill it back in with ink or paint or whatever you need to do.
And then there's this material, but I don't use this too much. This is opaque Copic paint that you can put over top of it, but it actually degrades it quite strongly because it's not water resistant. So when you put ink and that, it turns gray and it's not useful. I thought it would be a good workaround in the beginning, but I don't use it. I use the sometimes, but most of the time, if I'm uncomfortable with it, I just throw the page away and start again. And it's only those are the ones that I trace. When I'm really confident about something like figures, because I'm super confident on those, I just do it all on one page because it's faster. But when I'm doing something that I'm not confident on, like for instance, cars or guns, I don't know really a lot about cars and guns, and they're not organic shape. I'll use the light table for those to copy my pencil lines underneath it because I might blow it.
Yeah. That's actually something about inorganic objects too, is because they're so geometrically exact. Being off by a little bit. especially if you're drawing at a perspective, it can screw everything up. Everything can look off if you're just, but something that's organic, because there's no harsh angles. If you're maybe if you draw the hand slightly too narrow or something,
Yeah.
it doesn't look off. Maybe it just kind of looks like the hand's at a slightly more acute angle. It doesn't quite look off. Now, actually, I bring up hands because I'll bring this art back up here. Let's do this one. Here we go. So I'll bring this art back up. So hands are where I'll just point this out to anyone who's watching who's an artist. Hands are where artists can either suck or be good in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Not just faces. Faces are a big one, but hands.
Faces and hands. Go down to the Madrigal Island one. There's a really good hand.
Yeah, hands have so much complexity to them. You don't think about how complex they are because you just are never really looking at your hands. But
down at the bottom,
there's a lot to hands, like just this, for instance.
Yeah.
So I noticed some artists, a lot of comic artists, can't draw hands, including Rob Liefeld.
Yeah, that's true.
Who would draw like hands where like the fingers all get successively bigger or something as you go, or like this finger's enormous and then the sword comes out at like a weird angle because he just didn't know how to draw the hand and the object in the hand together.
The thing is, we know what our hands look like because you can freely see it. Here's the one. This is a close up on the hand on that panel 3 there. John used to do this. John Buscema used to do this all the time, and it's because the hand's so expressive, you can get a piece of information because what that information is telling you is that there's another person there, but you can also get some subtextual information. He's picking up a stick,
the tension of the on the pinky.
Yeah. In particular. John used to do this all the time, just show the hand, and then you get away from drawing 2 figures in a panel because it becomes cluttery, right? So that kind of a trick has to be able to do the hand nicely,
Yeah, look at this crazy lady. Oh my.
Zombie. That one's written by Scott Seppi. He's in Oregon, I think, and he really likes the moody kind of dark kind of world of the Northwest coast, the Pacific Northwest, and so his story is set in Alaska.
I love stories set in Alaska. Actually, I remember this movie with Robin Williams. And
I love that movie
called Insomnia.
Yeah, I love it.
If you've never like been to kind of the northern climes of North America, you live in northern Canada, right?
Yes, there's snow on the ground where I live right now.
Where do you live? You don't live in the Northern Territories, do you?
No, but I used to live very close to those. I've actually come south in my senior years. No, I live north of a major northern city called Prince George in Canada, in British Columbia, and I don't live in Prince George, but I live further north than that.
Okay. Yeah, if you guys have never been up there, basically during winter, it's unending darkness.
Mm-hmm.
And there was actually there was a movie called 30 Days a Night. There was a vampire movie that was
I love that idea.
Barrow, Alaska, where basically the sun doesn't rise for a month because they're so far north. It's the northernmost city, I think, in the world. Definitely.
You remember?
There might be one that's further north in Russia.
It might be that that vampire lead in that one. When he realized that the sun didn't come out, they said in that guttural language, it sounds like, and then the subtitle said, "We should have come here a century ago." I was like, yeah, because they don't feel the cold,
Yeah, but you get this opposite effect in the summer too, which is that it's
always sun.
It's always sunny, and so it just your kind of your rhythms are always disturbed. But because a lot of Europeans, like me, come from Northern European stock. There is this seasonal crossover that we kind of miss in California, where it's like I'm like, yes, I want it to get dark, and it never really gets dark enough. And it never in the summer. It's not, the days are still not that long.
Yeah, well, it happens here. We get it. We don't get the midnight sun, but where I lived before we did. And but right now, it's dark by 6 o'clock now. 6 o'clock.
Yeah. Someone asked, how is getting your art supplies up there?
It's terrible. Thanks for asking. My wife is very diligent woman, and whenever we go to places, she buys like, multiple versions of the things. Like I've got a stack of Bristol board that's like 200 pages, more than 200. I got triplets of everything. So when I run out, I have to go to Amazon, and that's always a monster because you go through these. This is the workhorse of the brush illustrator. It's the Series 7. It's the Series 7. Is number 3, Winsor and Newton. This is the workhorse. They used to use this in the old days all the time, and this is the one that I use as well. This, you might think that you should have had a smaller tip than that, but no, you can just get such a fine line with just this puny tip at the top, and then you can fatten it out by pressing down. This costs you a lot of money on Amazon, and you bust these things down really quickly because every single time you have to clean it out, you make sure there's no ink left in the ferrule there. So you got to get it really clean. And I'll tell you a little tip here. Once you've washed it out, you want to maintain that point on it. And this is how you do it. You take your hand like that, and where you have those folds in your hand, you put the brush within the fold. Let me see if I can make this look. Yeah, like that. And then you just sort of spiral it out, and you can get a nice point on it all the time.
I'm ripping all the hairs out.
And you don't do this. What I'm doing right now, that'll poison you. Do it like this.
That'll poison you. Actually, so there's this is completely unrelated, but I'm reminded of it, where it's like, if you have a glass of milk that's 1% poison, is it wrong to focus on the 1% poison?
Yeah, I know. I don't know. That's a 1% poison still.
Yeah, no. The answer is you gotta. 1% poison will kill you. Yeah. Right? You want 0% poison.
Yeah.
So anyway, yeah, that's great. Let's go through each of the stories real quick because
sure.
Time we've just been talking shop the whole time, which is fun. Yeah, I like to talk about art and making art, and that'll probably be the next thing I add into my kit is some level of better visual art than what I can currently do.
So in Greta, that's the jungle adventure. Trials of Greta. She's going to be in the jungle, and she's going to eventually face up with King Ape, a speaking giant 10-foot ape that wears a crown in an ancient civilization. And there's like Tesla coils and weird science in it. They'll love it.
I think we found the pinup here. I can't get it bigger. No.
Where she's falling down on her ass, dear.
There you go.
Yeah. That's regular size in a comic, and it's a big panel. That's about that big.
Yeah.
So the next story, what is that below it? It's Kip Sterling, supernatural detective.
Yeah.
This one's set in 1947 in Hollywood and set in World War I at the same time, because Kip lives in both worlds. He's a detective, but he's also a member of the living dead.
Oh,
he gets turned into a vampire, and he now uses that supernatural power to try and use it for good. So this story, set in 47 Hollywood, tries to bring him back in time to the time when he became a vampire back in the First World War in Germany against his arch rival Otto von Wittgenstein, a German mad scientist. So that's a real pulp trope, the mad scientist, the living dead. You'll love this story. It involves ghouls. It involves there's a little sequence that I sort of borrowed from Michael Moorcock, where there's a huge golem that comes charging down the hallway, and Kip has to fight him. And so the story's told in 2 time frames.
Yeah, it's from the Dream of Earl. No, yeah, Dream of Earl Auerbach.
Yeah. You remember that?
Yeah, I know my Michael Moorcock.
You do, yeah. And that's a little section for it. Captain Blood of Kirby told me to draw her nude, and I censored it for this picture. I wasn't sure if they'd let me up.
No, yeah, it's a good idea. So just as a little aside, guys, if whatever you put up on Kickstarter, if you're doing art or anything like that, you want to keep it PG-13 or better. There's no reason to put anything up that now. That's not to say you can't have anything controversial in your books, but you probably shouldn't put it up on Kickstarter or Indiegogo.
Don't give them a reason to make a red flag out of it. Just don't. No reason.
Yeah, there's no reason to. And is this like your narrator in the?
Oh yeah, we haven't talked about him. Uncle Victor. Yeah. Uncle Victor is a funny old character that I've been talking about since I was a little kid. We used to have this a slough. Do you know that word down in California? A slough, or is that a Canadian word?
It's like slide, it's like a
pond.
Oh no, a pond. Okay, I'm thinking of
a slough. Yeah. Anyways, this kind of a thing is something that we have in farmland, and I had one up where I grew up in the country, and it got overgrown with this horrible weed. And my little brother, who is also doing some art in this. He's doing the paintings for the last story you'll see. My little brother, I used to terrify him by saying there was this monster living in this slime called Uncle Victor. So when I wrote this story, I decided to bring him back, and I thought, what does Uncle Victor look like? Well, he looks like Uncle Frank from Hellraiser. Have you seen Hellraiser?
Yes.
Yeah, that's my little homage to Uncle Frank. So these pulp magazines always used to have like a character like that, the creep, or like the the crypt keeper. So mine is Uncle Victor. There he is. He's the host.
What's up, smooth skin?
Yeah. So this story, Queen of Korre, this is a dark fantasy story, and it basically has a little visual gag of Rocky Horror Picture Show. You can see that those two guys sitting there at the front. One of them is Brad from the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and the other one is the criminologist. And they're not characters in this story. They're just the announcers at the beginning. A little throwback, because I used to like the Rocky Horror Picture Show when I was a kid. And it's also a pulpy sort of a story. So there's lots of Easter eggs in it. And basically, this is about a football player named Zach Blaze. And if you've ever seen the movie from the 80s made by Richard O'Brien, which is Flash Gordon, it's kind of an idea of the second world fantasy. He gets drawn from the world of 1950s Denton to the world of Korath, which is like an inverse world where the dominant race are dark elves, and then in this underworld he's going to have to battle to get himself free. And he fights trolls, and fights under goblins, and there's these horrible sea creatures called the Catonids, which is supposed to be like a Cthulhu kind of a thing, and these disgusting sort of fish things. And
kind of reminds me of the some of the D&D stuff that what's his name wrote, R.A. Salvatore. The Drizzt books, which actually I really do recommend at least the first three.
I agree with you. They're really good.
They're really good.
Yeah.
He does a really good job exposing a very unique setting and making you really care about some real bastards of some characters.
Yeah.
You know,
the name Korre is a kind of a pun on the fact that I don't know if you've ever read those Edgar Rice Burroughs of the stories of, in the center of the earth. This world Korre is actually core Earth. It's inside the Earth, and the sun is. Yeah, it's the inside Earth. So when Zach goes to this world, he thinks it's another world, but actually he's below the ground. And
he's on the. Yeah, I've like imagine the Earth is hollow and you're standing with your feet.
Yeah.
And it's so that's always a cool idea. There was actually an MMO that me and Matt used to play back when we lived in Vegas called Aeon or Ion. It's a Korean MMO, and that was the setup of the world, is that you were on the inside of this shattered world, and like this energy thing, the sun was in the middle. And then as you go through, you end up on the outside, and the outside's where like the monsters live. It was a very cool idea. So yeah, that one looks cool.
Yeah.
It's a Connecticut Yankee in King Arthur's court, except it's a football player in Dark Elf Land.
Yeah, that's right. So here's your story. Why don't you tell about this?
So this is a story I came up with a while back, and I pitched it to Jesse, and he liked it. And so I wrote a script for it, and this could be continued beyond what the story's in here. But basically, it's about this guy named Abram. He's a normal guy living in, shall we say, dystopian future. Could be a utopian future, depending on your perspective. But I look at it as sort of the next step of what we've got. Instead of phones, people have their communications devices literally implanted into their head. So they're always connected all the time. And Abram is a normal guy living a normal life until his implant malfunctions. And once his implant malfunctions and he's able to stop paying attention to SOCNET, which is the social network that everybody's plugged into all the time that manages their lives and their communications, he's able to actually see elements of the world that had just gone unnoticed, including people who are not part of the network. And this becomes a rather disturbing discovery for him as things start to go in the directions that SOCNET, not really a sentient thing, but in ways that SOCNET hasn't really planned.
That's cool.
that's basically the setup for this. You could think of there's many different cyberpunk influences and overtones, including like the Matrix and things like that.
Yeah.
But the main idea was I just wanted to take kind of our plugged in society to the next level and kind of be more explicit with how things can affect us, control us, and blind us to what's going on around us. And as the story gets deeper, there's a bunch of other disturbing things he finds out, and eventually he has to break free of this mental prison.
I made a little logo for the company SockNet, and I don't have it on hand. It's in our Twitter discussion if I can't find it yet, but it was a sock.
Yeah. a little bit of an Easter egg.
Yeah, and it's kind of holding the Earth in one end of it, and it's kind of extended out in a V shape. And I asked David if he could come up with like a really pithy sort of a statement, because the Earth is kind of just emerging from the outside of the sock, and he comes up with this: "Your world covered." That's so brilliant. That's why he's so brilliant.
There's a little element of this, and I put out a little short story that was just really an aphorism called "Live in the Pod and Eat Bugs." It was kind of like an extra dystopian version of this, where it's like the dude's required, he gets out of his bunk bed. It's his pod he lives in, and has to eat bugs for breakfast. He has to listen to the news. He's used up all of his credits to not listen to the news, and so the news is beamed directly into his head. He has to listen to a news broadcast on his way to work while everybody's doing drugs and sniffing around poop. This is like if I like science fiction stuff like this, where on the surface it seems somewhat utopian. People are nicely dressed, well fed. They seem happy. I love this expression on her face, because there's actually elements here that are a little bit under the surface. There's a plastered on happiness.
Yeah.
And then you have Abram, he looks almost corpse-like. He's just kind of worn down from the world.
Blank face. Yeah.
And he's completely blank-faced about it. And so that's the one that's something that inspires me. Is it looks like utopia, but below the surface, there's something much more sinister.
She's also got Uma Thurman's haircut from Gattaca.
Yeah, I love Gattaca. Gattaca is one of my favorite movies, actually, and that's a great one too. Everybody dresses nice, everything looks nice, but the society's arranged in a way that's actually dystopian, not utopia.
Yeah, that's right.
It merely looks like utopia. All right, next one, Bran the Northern Boy.
Northern Boy, yeah. So this is a bit of my autobiography about me growing up a little bit, but it's sort of set with a kind of a higher hand. It's about the proposed invasion of Hibernia, which is Ireland, in 84 by the Romans. Now, there's this interesting fort, really, that is, or the remains of what people think is a fort, at this place called Drumnach. I don't know how to say it as an Irishman. Do you have any Irish in you? Drumnach.
I'm half Irish.
It's sitting there in that right up there, Drumnag or something like that.
Drumnach.
Thank you. And it's remains of a Roman, what looks like a Roman fort, and this is very upsetting to the people of the Emerald Isle, because they like to keep the idea that the Romans never penetrated in. And I'm making on the idea that they did in this case. So this boy, he's raised by the barbarians, and it's going to be a sort of a story that many of you heard. The invading civilized people from the south are actually the bad guys, and the good guys are the primitives, but it's not. In fact, the ignorant and the savage and the unenlightened life that he's living is a brutal life. He's mistreated, and he meets this Roman legionary who becomes sort of his surrogate father, and he enlightens him. He teaches him about Plato. He teaches him about the world that's outside of Ireland. And now Bran is caught between these two worlds, because these invading armies get the sign that they have to wipe this rebellious barbarian tribe out that represent Bran's family. So that's where the story is going to come in. I don't want to tell you too much about it, but it's a little bit of a Ayn Rand story a little bit, and it's got a kind of a sense about being adhered to reason rather than passion. And that was my personal story, because I was brought up in a way that was very emotion ridden and passion ridden, and I feel that there's a lot of errors that happened from kind of that. I got a lot of that, but I didn't get a lot of the rationality. And I feel that this story was a way for me to exorcise some of that stuff that happened. And some of the anecdotes are actually things that really did happen to me, although I've hyped them up a bit. Like in the pages following the sequence, the opening scene is where he's trying to stop an animal that's coming down a chute, like a hunting chute, and it's a caribou, and he's just a little boy with a stick, and the caribou like literally just bounds right over him. He's got no way of stopping it. And this really happened to me, except it wasn't a caribou, it was a sheep, and I was a little boy being put in a position that was far too hard for me to stop, some animals. Now sheep's not very big, but when you're small it is, and it like bounded right over me and knocked me down. And so I took excerpts from my life and I made this story, and I'm not trying to impugn or sort of insult anyone in my family, but I wanted to use it as a kind of an example of the two sort of ways of living, the romantic, sort of passionate, emotion-based way of these Hibernians versus the rational kind of Roman, and the audience is going to see which one's the better way.
Yeah. All right, that sounds very interesting. Real quick question: is Strange Adventures intended as a one-shot, or is there a hope to have additional volumes?
Well, the hope is that it will keep going, because some of these stories are not going to be finished within the pages of Strange Adventures. They're going to show up as serials. Strange Adventures is 64 pages long, so you're going to get a lot of story, but not all of them will be completed. Like, for instance, the Bran story won't be completed because there's a long story about him later on traveling outside of Ireland and stuff. And you'll get some complete standalones like those pulp magazines used to offer, but a lot of them used to have a next time. Yeah. To be continued.
And what I liked about anthologizing some of these things is that, first of all, from if you're trying to sell someone a product, when you have more variety, you could sell to more people. More people are interested. If there's only 2 or 3 stories you like out of 6, it's still worth getting because you like those 2 or 3 stories. And yeah, maybe you read those other, you read the other ones too.
Yeah.
I used to get the story magazines, and I'd read all the stories, because even the ones I didn't really like, because I was bored. There's
I know
nothing else to do, and I just like sit in the back of class and read. What was the one? I don't remember the names now, but yeah, I used to read the old sci-fi mags.
Yeah, like Heavy Metal magazine.
Heavy Metal.
Yeah.
I wasn't supposed to have that one at school. I was supposed to have that one.
That's got some pornographic stuff. There's nothing pornographic in Strange Adventures.
Yeah, I have a lot of affection for heavy metal, but yeah, you even read the stuff that isn't super what you're interested in, and then of course, from a reader's perspective, you get a lot of different things. You can buy something and know that there's something in there that you're going to like. There's going to always be something that you're interested in.
Yeah.
And then that it's a great way to keep the series going. You've got to have that next installment. So let's get the next installment going.
So that's about all I want to say about Northern Boy. I don't want to tell too much about it because I like people to read it. This one is a standalone story. It's called The Final Test. It's kind of like, I would say, the Twilight Zone meets Conan the Barbarian. And basically it's about set in a medieval sort of world. And this man is applying to this group called the Protectors, who it's some sort of an order that he's denied. And he's denied because he's a real son of a bitch. And you see the first panel just down there. He's actually being judged by them, and they're saying you've done all this stuff, whoring, abandoning your family, and I'm not going to tell too much about the plot of this because it's a surprise. So he's going to go through this adventure after they reject him, and he's going to find at the end something quite different than what he sets out to do, because he's sort of self-appoints himself as a kind of a vigilante. A worker of justice, a vigilante justice, and he chases a man through a landscape, and it's got some pretty violent parts in it, but it also has a quality of being a medieval morality play. And when it comes to the end, I think you'll be surprised.
Cool. I like this. I like these pillars talking. Denied.
Yeah, I like that
Denied.
Too. Yeah. There's lots of little secrets in this picture.
Are there?
Yeah, when you read the story, you'll see all the little things that reference things that you'll see in the later. It's all part of the plot.
Okay, great.
So this one's Scott Seppi's story. Scott, who I mentioned before, it's a horror set in Alaska in 1957, I think. Just the graduation year for these 5 kids. They're just fresh out of high school, and they, for a lark, they've stayed up all night, and it's the early morning, the first day after graduation, and there's a super low tide. and they decide to go out to this one of these rocky islands that dot the Pacific Northwest. There's thousands of them. You spend all your life living there and you never think much about them because they're there. And one of these days they decide, let's go there. And because the tide's so low, they can cross rocks and they can go off to it. And they never would have thought of doing it. And as they're going it, the main boy has a bit of a memory of it, that his grandfather used to call this Madigal Island. But he was an immigrant from somewhere in Norway. And his accent was actually obscuring the real thing he was saying, which was Mad Gull Island. The gulls on the island are mad. Madigal Island. And so everyone's come to think of it as being Madigal, but he meant they're mad. The gulls are mad that live there. And well, as you can see in this picture, it's going to turn into a crescendo.
Horror as Stacy crouched over Betty's bloody and battered body. Wanted to run and stop her, but Eddie was frozen in place with shock and fear. Then she turned, and her words came out in tortured screeches. Eddie, I'm sorry. I'm just so hungry. So damn hungry.
Yeah, there you go. Zombie horror. Well, I used to love zombies, man. Oh, so when Scott wrote this, well, I pitched to him, and he said, "What would you like?" I said, "Zombie horror," and he came up with this one.
It's great. I love zombies too. I love the old horror mags, the old like Marvel horror magazines they had. I don't even remember half of them. I remember the stories, and I don't even remember where I read them.
Oh, same.
As part of some anthology. Zombie stories were the ones that zombies always scared me the most because, okay, if you're a vampire, you still have control of your faculties on some level. But if you're a zombie, it's like you're mindless. And so to me, the most horrible fate is like mindlessness.
Yeah, and this one, he's created an idea kind of like a biological zombies, that they're not the living dead, but they're basically are, because they're consumed with this unstoppable desire to eat things, and it takes them over.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It kind of reminds me of it doesn't really, but like the idea that they're not actually dead, but they're overcome with that. Reminds me of a rather grotesque comic called Crossed that I think actually Alan Moore wrote for.
I've never read that one.
It's really, I like it. I can't necessarily recommend it because it's basically rape zombies. I'll just put it that way. Right. So like you get this virus in you and it gives you this cross-shaped rash. That's why they're called the crossed.
Okay.
It destroys your inhibitions and makes you live out your most violent thoughts constantly. So people are constantly like killing other people and raping them and devouring them. And it's just horrible. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But they're still human beings, like underneath that, so they have some level of intelligence, which to me makes them very scary. But the art is incredibly gory and incredibly violent. It's on an extreme scale. Especially there's the original creator, the original writer did the first run, which I don't remember if it was 12 or 24 issues, and then they did a series of secondary runs, which I think Alan Moore wrote for one of those. One was called Psychopath, I think.
Oh my God.
And the real villain, of course, is a human. It's not a zombie. And so this human is he's manipulating, he's horrible. And like there's a part where he engages in some really psychotic stuff, like cuts a woman's face off. And I remember the art like holding up the face of like somebody he cut off. I'm like, I can't believe that somebody published this. And I don't remember who published it. I want to say it was Dark Horse, because they'll publish anything.
Did you buy it?
I have it. I have the digital versions.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Because that was back from a time when I was like, I'm not buying any more physical stuff. Who published it? Avatar Press published it.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Which is an independent press, but
yeah, you can get lots of wild stuff in the indie scenes.
Yeah. So it was pretty crazy. Alan Moore did write for it. How about that? Alan Moore wrote some of the issues. Yeah. They're
loving once again.
Family Values, Psychopath, Badlands, Wish You Were Here, Dead or Alive.
Wow. Well, Madigal is very violent, but there's no face cutting off. But there's lots of violence. I mean, Final Test by Scott Barnes, another Scott, is violent, and this is violent too. There's eating each other, and there's pretty brutal stuff in it. Nudity in this one as well. Actually, you can see I had to censor a part. Yeah.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. So this one is by your friend and I think marriage relative, Matt Wellman.
Yeah, he's my brother-in-law.
Brother-in-law, yeah. This one's Immortal Fear, and you probably know more about it than I. I've read it, but I don't know the breakdown of how he came about with the story. It's about a guy called Silas Bishop, who is supposed to look like what's that guy's name? Jason Statham. That's what I tried to make him look like.
Yeah.
That's what he mentions him in the book. And I'm not going to put the whole novel in it, but one of the things that pulp magazines used to do was excerpts from novels, and they would do it in a format of long form copy called pictofiction, where there's a large text section written just as text with an accompanying illustration. And I'm going to do a big section from Immortal Fear where they happen to be in a flashback set in the jungles of South America, where they discover this sort of Mayan tomb that also has some interconnection with the Norse pantheon. And it's kind of one of those Thor Heyerdahl ideas that, like, long ago that the Vikings may have crossed to the Americas, and they did, but these ones somehow found themselves in this temple, and it's all part of the story. I don't want to reveal Matt's plot. Can you add anything to the background of his story?
Yeah, so basically you're focusing on one of the flashback parts.
Yes.
From the book. So yeah, Matt wrote this book. He spent a long time writing it. And
I'll just show one. I've got one right here.
Yeah, I linked it in chat. I linked the Amazon page for it.
Here it is.
Here's the basic setup is Silas Bishop gets recruited by some supernatural beings to basically be their living servant in a way. And so he's killed, but he can't really die. And so then that kind of gives him a kind of a superpower.
Mm-hmm.
That's the best way I could describe that. And so, yeah, that's more or less the setup. And then there's some flashbacks to kind of a secret organization that has taken him for a little bit of a ride along the way too. So at the beginning of the book, he's an assassin, and then you get these flashbacks where you see kind of how he got there, how he ended up there after leaving the military.
Yeah, and this is one of the sections that I focused on because I thought it was the most pulpy part. Would you agree that this is a real pulpy part?
You're going into the jungle and the temple.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I read the book.
Oh, there's a great scene that comes up that's got another sort of focus of the living dead, and these like zombie guards that are protecting the ship that's inside the temple. It's an awesome section, and I really let it out with the drawings, like really full on illustration with these images of these pictures, because they're just one picture per page, right?
Yeah, and that's great. Yeah, so I think it's great to do highly detailed stuff if you're going to do like one panel.
Yeah,
I think it looks great.
One big panel, yeah.
Oh, here's the last one.
And this last one is also kind of pictofiction style, and it's written by a friend of mine from high school named Brian Cullen. He lives in Roberts Creek, British Columbia, and he's done a series of sort of poems come prose that are sort of these, I don't know, textural reminiscences about growing up in the strange era of the early part of the 80s and the weirdness that we experienced in living in these places. And he tells these stories, and this was around the time of Clifford Olson, a very horrible murderer that was killing kids at that time. And he was chased by a guy in a Datsun who he thought might have been Clifford Olson. There's no evidence that it was, but Brian uses that as a jumping off point to sort of talk about the terrors of youth. And my brother did that painting there. He's going to do the acrylic paintings, and I've done charcoal and chalk drawings, these kind of abstracty, expressionistic drawings that are supposed to keep this dreamlike part. And the title is called Fish Head and Others, which is a reference to the Robert E. Howard story, Skullface and Others, And Fish Head and Others is this dream that Brian had when he was a little boy. All of these are memories from when he was a little boy. And it's a disturbing story about walking through the park and being lost in his dream. And he sees these things sticking out of the ground, which he thinks at first are branches of growing trees. But upon closer look, they're human legs sticking up. And he gets terrified in his dream. And he sees his mother at the end of the path. and he starts running down the path to get towards her. And when he gets up close to embrace her, she's got a fish head and it's sticking up out of her collar, and she's gulping air. And this image was something from his dream as a little boy. And so he's put these things together into 5 different vignettes. I think that's the best way to call them. And they're not in a narrative. They're just impressionistic stories. And this one is the man in the Datsun, Clifford Olson. Yeah.
I love it. Now there is something about, okay, I'm going to try to describe this for people in a way that doesn't sound too solipsistic, but when you grew up in the 80s, there was being a kid in the 80s was like, there was this profound sense of being alone sometimes.
No shit.
Like
That's totally true.
Being helpless.
Yeah.
That's the best way I could put it. Like there was no adults to help you. And you just kind of felt alone with the world. Like we were kind of unkept in some ways. Like we could, nowadays I would never dream of like letting my son just like go to the park on his own. Like, I'm going to go with you and watch you at the park. But back then it was like, yeah, just go to the park, get on our bikes and ride across town, like go out into the fields. We go play in the empty fields around town, just weird things like that. And so whenever there was something that, and as a kid, you can imagine much greater existential threats sometimes than you can as an adult.
Yeah.
And that's something about horror. So this horror story, I'm going to try to finish up this week and get out for anyone who wants to read it. It's about a kid whose mom works at a funeral home. And so he thinks there's a monster in the morgue. Right. And you kind of find out what it is later on, but like, there's this profound feeling that like your parents don't believe you and aren't going to help you and don't, I don't know. It's so hard for me to describe, but it's just the feeling of being alone all the time.
And that's exactly what Brian captured in these stories. Each one of these is a reminiscence about one of those moments, and they're textural. And he even uses the word latchkey at one point, because that's what we did. We just locked ourselves in. And when I read his pieces, I was like, this is real. Like he's really hitting something. And Brian is a poet. He's been a published poet for many years, and he publishes in French and in English. And so I asked him to write this piece. He's not a comic guy at all. And he was hesitant at first because it was actually some dark corners of his past. But he said out loud to me that he thought going back with me in it and me visualizing these things was kind of a healing process in a way for him, because some of these memories from childhood are, I don't know about you, David, but I have some very disturbing memories of things that like Uncle Victor, like living in this mucky pond and wondering what the hell that is. And Brian really captured it. So I think you'll really like these 5 pieces. It's not regular comic fare. This is literature almost, I would say.
Yeah, totally a good variety to close out the magazine. And then here we have the retro ads.
Yeah, the retro ads. That's my favorite bit. I've got 4 pages of these fake vintage ads. Fake. They're not fake. They're for real things, but they look like old fake. There's David right in the middle there, DVS Press. And basically what I've did is I've done ads for properties that are actual or, people's social media. And you can actually contact these people or buy the things from them. And one of the tiers that I'm selling on the Kickstarter is that the page that's not been made yet, you can become one of these ads. I'll put you on.
I love Jeff's. This is like this monochrome version of Jeff's painting of like with the knife like going into the face.
Jeff is off the charts. He's gory. I actually asked Jeff to collaborate, but he declined me, unfortunately. I would have loved to have had him. He declined me. But Jeff's such a great painter. That's just a picture, man.
Yeah.
You see the tip of the tongue getting cut off there?
This painting, I'll have to like look it up sometime. It's just great. It's just a great painting. Like the look on the face, like it's just perfect. And he does all the acrylics, I think.
Yeah, he's all acrylic. He's a great painter. And there's the retroist in the middle. I don't know if you guys ever heard the retroist. He's a great guy. He does lots of vintage stuff about Atari and stuff. And up in the right corner, there's a lead figure company that I designed lead figures for, right up there. Flags of War. Yeah, I did that. I did those lead figures. And that heavy metal album I did there below in the second column, in the second to the top, that one, yeah. Greyhawk, yeah, I did the cover for that too.
Yeah, cool. All right, I think that's about it. So we're we've done about an hour and a half, which is good. So we've got a couple people that backed it. I really appreciate that.
I do too.
Had to go, and he did say that he backed the project, which do appreciate that. And we'll be working on trying to get more people interested in this style. This is a style of magazine that, as far as I know, just doesn't really exist anymore.
Yeah, I don't think it does. I did a lot of market research. It's really vacant. I mean, there was a lot of it in the 70s, and it dropped off a lot because I think, frankly, it takes a lot to produce this kind of art. The really serious inking is not some sort of a fly-by-night production. You have to really, really work at it to make it work because you've only got just black and paper. That's it.
Yep. Yeah, and we've talked about this a bunch of times. One of the things I love about line art, or just, I don't know how, let's look at the broad category of line art, because this could include like pencil sketches on some level maybe, but it is a representation of the thing, not the thing itself.
Mm-hmm.
And so because it's a representation of the thing and not the thing itself, there's a different level of accuracy you have to put. You have to know how gestures actually end up translating. It's quite challenging, I think, to make good line art. And it's kind of interesting that we start people usually with drawing classes.
Yeah.
When drawing is, I think, in some ways much more difficult than painting.
Mm-hmm.
I don't want to say that because like, painting is really, painting can be very complex. But when you are getting to the point where you are more accurately representing the thing, like a painting is closer to just a picture of the thing. It's not, but because it has this layer to it as well. But line art in particular requires a lot of understanding what a mark ends up representing in the viewer's eye, because it's not the thing itself. If you have a couple of hatches on, say, somebody like this hatching right here. Well, this is a muscle separation. The body doesn't look like that, but our brain sees that and understands that that's what it actually is. It's a weird thing to think about.
It's totally different things, drawing and painting. I mean, I guess they're related in their visual art, but painting is like tonal and drawing is like linear. I mean, you can draw tonally, but every mark that you make somehow is a mark that's line related. You just mask them together and make a tone.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, so is there anything else that you want to add before we close it off? The very first NewPub talk.
Yes, I don't have anything to add other than just thank you for watching. And I'm really, really hopeful that it can get funded. And if it doesn't, it's not going to break my heart. I'll just go for it again another time.
Yeah, and it's okay. Yeah, we'll figure it out. And because it's an already completed project, really. I mean, it's very close to completion at this point. You can always ship it with some other thing in mind,
Yeah.
But
I want to talk about print-on-demand comics with you one time, like the way that the books are done. I think that would be pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm not the best guy to talk to about it. Probably, I mean, there's other comic artists that know a lot about it. Most people are not going through print-on-demand, but a guy I've been talking to a little bit on Twitter named George. What's his last name? I'll tell you his last name right now.
Sure.
Oh, George Alexopoulos.
Okay.
He's got some methods worked out for being able to print at home.
Huh.
So he says, you could print ash cans at home. I'm like, but printers, my printer is actually good enough to produce really high quality printing if it's black and white, because laser printers can be
really good.
So if you look at it from that, it may be possible to print a black and white comic really cheaply on your own with the investment of a decent, high volume printer. And then if you had to do color panels, you could just print those somewhere else or at a little bit more expense for those couple of pages. Just like, remember you used to have the color plates where you'd have a magazine or book and like the color plates would be sewn in.
Yeah.
But they'd be printed separately because it's too expensive to do that whole setup. And then you just sew them in, or you'd have one fold that had the color pages in the middle. So maybe that's something too, but he's apparently got a method that's worked out pretty good for printing.
That's a very interesting idea.
But we can now. And it's like, most people don't think that way, because I realize we're kind of you're following the leaders, and the leaders are coming from traditional printing and traditional publishing, which means they're going to think like traditional publishers. Like, I need a printer to print this. I need a shipper to ship this. How do I fulfill, where it's like, well, we have we live in an age where print on demand could be print on demand at your own house.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I think it might be good to look at print on demand stuff with, say, something like Ingram Spark or through Amazon's fulfillment or whatever they do, because then you don't have to worry about the fulfillment part.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you can print on demand the comics that people buy from you, and then if they buy it from Amazon, Amazon will just print it and ship it. But as far as I know, we could talk more about this off the stream, but guys, like, this is a print on demand book.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, let me plug my new book. It came out yesterday. It's called City of Silver.
All right.
This will be a nice long series for guys who want long series. It's full of adventure. This one I like to call 310 to Yuma, but fantasy.
Oh, excellent.
So it's good. Apparently, people really love this book cover, which is funny because I guess I'm getting good at it because I did it relatively quickly.
Yes, you are getting good at it. They're very good.
Yeah, to get it out on time. I will tell you, I did this on a video. This guy, you see him on a bunch of book covers because not enough people take stock photos like looking like this. He's actually wearing Converse shoes, so I had to kind of hide him. I created a composition where I could kind of hide him mysteriously behind this cloaked woman.
Oh, that's great.
So anyway, that one came out today. It's 99 cents for the ebook and $6.25, I think, for the paperback. But if you do the print on demand stuff, you get a book binding, right? And so if you're doing say 64 pages, the book binding is probably fine. If you're doing less than that, like if you're doing a 28-page floppy, you probably want that staple.
Yeah, you want a staple. Yeah.
So for longer ones, it's probably fine to have that. The only problem is getting it in the bigger dimensions, which I know you can do through Ingram Spark. You used to be able to do it through CreateSpace, but now it's a little bit harder. If anyone's watching that has any of Varg's RPGs, they're printed on these big books. They're CreateSpace books, so they come in these big books. How does he sell these big books for $10? Turns out the bigger the book, the cheaper, and not cheaper it is, but a big book is not any more expensive to print than a small book.
Is that so?
I print my books slightly smaller. Like for the shorter books, I make them 8x5s because I think they aesthetically look better. A shorter book looks better. Otherwise, it would look like a pamphlet.
Yeah, you're right, because it's not so thick. Yeah.
I wanted it'd be better if I could get it a little closer to like the pulp size.
Pocketbook, yeah.
Yeah, right. But it's close enough for now, and they don't really do this size.
They don't, eh?
No, not the print on demand. This is like an industry thing. It's like a weird size, it's like 8 or 9.5 centimeters by like, I don't know. It's a weird size. Whereas like 8x5 inches is really easy to do. So anyway,
awesome.
All right, that's it. Probably it tonight, guys. Anything else to add, Jesse?
No, thanks so much, David. It's really, really helpful, and I'm really glad that you're part of this project. I think it wouldn't be the same without you. The music is just so wonderful, and your script is one of my favorites in the whole book.
All right, thank you so much for the compliment. So you can buy City of Silver now, and please back Strange Adventures. Hopefully, issue 1 of many
to come.
There's always an upward trajectory that can happen.
Yeah, we got the stories.
Upward trajectory with stuff like this. So anyway, thanks so much, and we'll see you all next time.
Bye.